I'd like to invite you to offer your views about an incident, a story that I read about, where a 17-year-old boy sold his kidney. You all know the story. He bought an iPad and an iPhone. But how many think it's okay? It's a free market, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Because I study economics, and I think every adult is an economic man that he has to be responsible for his behaviors. He clearly knows the consequence of losing one kidney. We should give him the chance to take that risk.
To choose for himself. A lot of people agree with that. All right, that's very good. So I would like to hear from those who object. Yes. And stand up.
Well, I think it's wrong because give your kidney to others. Maybe you feel it's okay, but in fact, for the respect of a person, it is not respect of life.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Even facing the same concept like justice.
Yeah.
You see the difference from different countries?
Yes, yeah. It's prompted me to reflect on why there are these differences when I encounter them. When I had these conversations with young people in China in the 2000s, what struck me was, first, they did have very strong pro-market moral intuitions, as I mentioned. And I would put a lot of examples to students and to the audience, asking them whether they think this or that social practice should be governed by money or by other norms. So I put questions like this. What struck me was the moral intuitions about buying and selling were similar in the US and China. In Eastern Europe, it was similar. In Poland, for example. Most European countries, it was quite different.
You think why? Why? Similar mentality?
I think it's because, especially in the early 2000s, that China had experienced, the young generation had grown up with the market reforms. And it had been a period of tremendous economic growth.
It's kind of freedom for them.
Yeah, it was an expression of freedom and rising affluence, but especially of freedom. But at the same time, they were looking for meaning that markets could not provide. And so the search for meaning persisted even after the market triumphalist moment. And I think that one of the reasons that people were drawn to the Justice Book was this sense that there are moral meanings that lie beyond markets and beyond economics. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe we're facing two choices or different choices. We can't choose the best one. There are no best one. Just less evil. Just less evil one, maybe.
But I wouldn't regard these as closed alternatives. I would ask a different question. How is it possible to combine the benefits of market arrangements and technological innovations with sources of meaning, deliberation, dialogue, reflection that can answer to higher human purposes and ends? Our mistake is not to use markets to organize economic activities. Our mistake is not to hope that technological innovations will deliver real improvements to the way we live our lives, Our mistake is the tendency to think that markets and technology by themselves can define human purposes and ends. They can't. And when we put too much faith in them, when they become a kind of faith, almost a kind of religious faith, markets and technology, then we're bound to be disappointed. And when the disappointment comes, the disappointment may take harsh, dangerous forms.
So the situation is so complicated. What kind of solution we can provide? We try good dialogue, but very difficult.
I think we need to focus less on arming people for meritocratic competition and focus more on contending with inequalities of income and wealth, but also inequalities of honor, recognition, and esteem. And this means we have to renew the dignity of work. We have to broaden our conception about what counts as a valuable contribution to the common good. And we need the kind of class-mixing institutions in civil society that will lead us to encounter one another, to be in one another's presence, not only in our phones, all the more so when our societies are divided and polarized, because the people we encounter tend to be people only like ourselves. We need to overcome that.
But every solution, every theory always has its own flaw.
Yeah.
So how about your solution? Your attack the meritocracy, but maybe your theory, your book still has kind of flaw. Maybe you must overcome what kind of flaw it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what flaws have you identified? Let's start with that.
I don't know. Maybe too idealistic.
Too idealistic?
Yeah.
You think so?
I don't know.
So what I've just suggested is really too much to hope for. I don't think that reducing inequality and renewing the dignity of work and creating a greater equality of condition and recognition will happen anytime soon. They're not easy projects to undertake. So I want to be realistic about that.
But do you think, should philosophy be more responsible for the historical consequence or not? The idea and the reality, Russell, Hegel.
Yeah.
They talk about inequality, talk about the virtue, but the consequence may be this one.
Yes.
Yeah, extreme opposite.
Yes.
How to see the paradox?
If one thinks, and I, as I do, that philosophy is always situated in the world, that philosophy should attend to the world, then philosophy cannot be indifferent, and the philosopher cannot be indifferent to the way in which various people or parties or movements implement philosophical ideas. So there's always an interplay between political practice and the philosophical ideas that inform it. And often they can go off the rails. They can go in very dark directions that the philosopher may never have wanted or anticipated. That's always a danger. That's one of the persisting dangers of philosophy. The part of Hegel that has led political practice astray in wrong direction, that teaches that history has a single ultimate destination, and that it takes a certain shape, that has contributed to some of the dangerous movements in history who may have been inspired by the idea that history points in a certain direction, and that it's our responsibility either to let history unfold or to help history unfold, to reach that final destination once and for all. I think the phrase or the idea, once and for all, is a deeply dangerous idea. And I think it's at odds with the philosophical spirit of questioning, contesting, offering competing interpretations.
In your mind, in our time, which idea is the most dangerous idea in today's world?
I would say that the forces today that are most dangerous are the versions of religious fundamentalism or of hyper-nationalism or of ideological purity that all draw in one way or another on the idea that moral truths and human truths are singular, that there's only one way of interpreting our past, there's only one historical end or destination, there's only one true way of interpreting religious and spiritual traditions. Because what this misses, well, it leads to dangerous politics, but it also misses the deep pluralism of the human experience.
So how about the Silicon Valley philosophy? Is techno-driven ideology?
I would say it's a version of this. Because the most extreme versions of Silicon Valley techno-utopianism, some have a more specific term of transhumanism or singularity, because they too think that history is on their side. They too think that as technology develops and as generative AI develops, we will be transcending the messy, contentious, pluralist human projects and arriving at a kind of singularity where perhaps our minds will meld with machines. And the very idea that going to the moon or to Mars is kind of a natural outgrowth of this way of thinking, where they can start anew. It's the ambition really to start from scratch with a clean slate, to begin anew, unfettered, uncomplicated by disagreement, contestation, challenge, dialogue, controversy, where they can start anew and build a society from scratch that is not, as they might see it, weighted down by the controversies that arise whenever human beings gather in society. So there is something, it's fantastical, but it's also dangerous and hubristic, because it implies that they are the avatars, they are the pioneers, the initiators of this new frontier that breaks free from the messy need to negotiate, to discuss, to disagree, which is essential to the human experience.
And the questions, like your questions from Q&A, what do you
我啊，8月来的，这个
快结束了是吧？
对，6月结束1年。我们进来吧。对。而且你是哪天到的？
前天刚到。
哦，所以还有时差吧？
有用户现在。
如果从他第一本书一直到现在，这40多年过去了嘛，你觉得他身上一以贯之的这个逻辑，或者他的一个对世界理解的方式、视角是什么呢？
他有一些东西是没有变，他认为，公共精神，对于个人和对于一个国家或者民族或者世界的政治都是特别重要的。所以公共性就是大家要商量，不能有些事情那么独断的来做。就是通情达理，就 reasonable。你不能有一个说我们发现了一个法则，这个法则，无论是你是用政治上的 规约教条也好，或者市场上教条也好，你都要得想想，在各种不同的情景下，它会怎么样？它是不是在有些地方可以转变，可以变通？它是应该不断的被检讨的。
但我们的教育特别容易给我们这种思维方式。
对，像绝对主义和相对主义这样的问题，你没有办法用一个完全的论述，来给出一个好的答案。但只要我们回到生活的场景里、情景里，更好的方式总是有可能的。那么就让我们去找那个更好的方式。我们不要总体性的解决问题，
对，要回到非常具体的那种状态里。
当然，这个具体的问题，我们会有一些哲学的想法，一直能够启示我们去探索。大家相互讨论啊，理性的推论啊，它是一套生活方式。如果真有这套生活方式，让我们寻求更好的办法，总是有可能的。
It's after 1960s. I mean, the Beach Boys, the Beatles. I mean, what kind of mood at the time? Be a high school student at the time.
Well, almost everyone in those days had long hair. I did too. As you can see from the picture.
Not so long.
Not so long. Yeah. And it was a time of questioning, just as you say. It was a time of cultural and political change.
Yeah.
As for me and many of my friends in that high school, we were ambitious, we were competitive with one another, I think excessively so. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, but I thought maybe I would go into politics. Well, this is when I was having a debate with Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
This was before he became president.
Yeah. He's governor of California?
He was governor of California.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be interesting to invite Ronald Reagan to the high school to have a debate, because in my high school, very few of us, young people, agreed with Ronald Reagan's philosophy. And he was for the war in Vietnam, we were against it. He was against the United Nations, critical of the United Nations. We were for it. He was against 18-year-olds having the right to vote. And we were in favor, of course.
Yeah, he's much conservative.
He was very conservative.
Yeah.
And in the school, we were much more liberal. And so I invited him to have a debate. I sent an invitation to his office and got no reply. And then my mother read in a magazine that he liked jelly beans, the candy. You know, those colorful candies.
I know.
So I bought a 6-pound bag of jelly beans.
How big? 6 pounds?
It's about this big.
The box.
And put it in a box with a bow and with an invitation. And I took it to his house. He lived not too far from my high school. And there were guards at the house and wanted to know what I had in the box. It looked suspicious. I said jelly beans. So they sort of searched the bag and they decided it was innocent enough, and they let me deliver it to his home. And a few days later, he called and said he would come to the school.
Wow.
And so we gathered everyone in the gymnasium, actually. That was the only place large enough. There were 2,400 students. He and I sat on the stage, and I asked him the toughest questions I could. And I had prepared, and I was a high school debater. And I thought this would be an easy matter to win a debate with Ronald Reagan.
The older man.
But he replied to each question respectfully, thoughtfully, with a sense of humor. And I realized after a half an hour, I hadn't really won the debate. And then we opened the questions to students, and the same thing happened. And the hour ended, and I thanked him, and he left. He hadn't persuaded us to change our minds to his conservative philosophies. But somehow, he had been gracious and amiable and charming, and he displayed to us, well, two things. First, the qualities that enabled him to be elected president 9 years later. And second, what I learned from that was the importance of listening respectfully, which is what he did, even though he did not change our minds.
If you can meet him, what kind of thing you want to say to him?
You mean if I could meet that young guy there?
Yeah, younger guy.
That younger guy.
Yeah, almost 50 years ago.
Well, what would I say? What would I say to that young man there? I would say debating is not a matter of winning an argument only. Really thinking and persuading depends on listening with respect. And in many ways, that's what I try to teach my students.
So why dialogue, debating is so important for society?
It's how we come to identify the meaning of justice and the common good. We have to ask the question, what is justice? What is a good society? What is the meaning of a good life? What civic virtues should we seek to cultivate? So if we care about bringing about justice and the common good, then we're kind of propelled into a dialogue about what justice and the good life really are. Because, of course, there are, and have always been, competing ideas about the meaning of justice and the common good. That's why the great philosophers of the past, Plato, Confucius, Aristotle, and so on, they had different ideas. And those who followed in the Western tradition, including John Locke and John Stuart Mill and Kant and Hegel and Marx, they all had different conceptions of the meaning of justice and questions of the good life and of civic virtue. If they disagreed, it's not surprising that we disagree. And yet, what's interesting is we have the sense that those arguments, though they seem impossible finally to resolve, they keep going. And they keep attracting our attention. And we want, in each generation, to figure out for ourselves what it means to seek a just society, what it means to aspire to the common good.
So if we were in the stage, I mean, the great soul, the Kant, Marx, they're all alive, actually.
Yes.
Interact with each student, with you.
Well, that's the idea. That's the fundamental idea, that these great philosophers are not just episodes in the history of ideas. They're not just museum pieces. They are episodes in arguments in which we are still engaged today. So that if I do my job well in teaching philosophy to this generation of students, they will feel as if they are in conversation with Plato and Aristotle and Kant. And because philosophy is a tradition of thought and argument that builds upon and refers always to the past.
You think why? Public philosophy is so important for society.
Public philosophy is an attempt to find meaning together that is not purely technocratic, not purely practical, not only about economic questions, about larger questions too. It's because we've been so preoccupied with GDP, with markets, with economic growth, and with technology. And it creates a moral vacuum. And unless it's filled with deliberation about public questions, it will be filled by narrow, intolerant, dangerous ideologies. And that's my worry. Let me give here one recent example of this. During the pandemic, in many ways, the pandemic highlighted inequalities that existed before the pandemic. A great many of us had the luxury of being able to work from home during the pandemic, to teach from home, to work from home, to write from home. Delivery workers, grocery store clerks, warehouse workers, truck drivers, nursing assistants, home health care providers, child care workers. Now, these are not the best paid or the most honored workers in our societies. But for a moment during the pandemic, we called them essential workers. We applauded them at the end of the day. We put up signs thanking them. This could have been a moment for a broader public debate about how to bring their pay and recognition into better alignment with the importance of the contributions they make. But it didn't happen. The pandemic receded. We never really had that moment. And now we've gone back to business as usual.
So you think meritocracy is part of reason?
And I think the answer to that question is connected to the widening inequalities of recent decades, and also to the changing attitudes towards success that have accompanied the widening inequalities. Over the past half century, really, those who've landed on top have come increasingly to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and that they therefore deserve the bounty that the market bestows upon them. And by implication, that those who struggle, those left behind, must deserve their fate as well. It produces a kind of hubris among the winners and humiliation among the losers. It teaches the winners, if I believe that I achieved whatever I achieved through my own efforts, through my own doing, because everything was fair, then I'm likely to inhale too deeply of my own success, to forget the luck and good fortune that helped me on my way, to forget my indebtedness to those who make my achievements possible. And so this is what I call the tyranny of merit.
Bring Michael Jordan here, I'm sure you can get him, and have him come and defend himself about why he makes $31 million. And I think what you're going to realize is his life was a very, very tough one to get to the top, and that we are basically being the majority oppressing the minority in a different light. It's very easy to pick on him. Very easy.
Effort. You know what Rawls' answer to that is? Even effort depends a lot on fortunate family circumstances for which we can claim no credit. Psychologists say that birth order makes a lot of difference in work ethic, striving, effort. How many here, raise your hand, those of you here who are first in birth order? I am too, by the way. Mike, I noticed you raised your hand. If the case for the meritocratic conception is that effort should be rewarded, doesn't Rawls have a point that even effort, striving, work ethic is largely shaped even by birth order. Is it your doing, Mike? Is it your doing that you were first in birth order? So why should income and wealth and opportunities in life be based on factors arbitrary from a moral point of view?